Hey everybody, hope you all are doing well and welcome back to Michael's Matters. Now, without a doubt, I, of course, am Michael. And today, we got new inflation numbers from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, or the BLS, that shows two things. One that is good, and one that maybe not so good, depending on how you think about it. First is that according to the newest numbers on the CPI, inflation has slowed slightly since last month, which I would say is good. But it is starting to show a trend that, if it continues, would mean that older folks and retired Americans on programs through Social Security, so that could be programs like Social Security Retirement, Social Security Disability SSDI, Supplemental Security Income SSI, as well as Railroad Retirement and VA benefits that are also pegged to it. Their annual cost of living adjustment, or the COLA for next year, that's 2024, could end up being lower, and in fact, could be below 3% or even hit zero. So today we are talking about the newest CPI numbers, how that relate to somebody's Social Security monthly benefits, and what that could potentially mean for next year's Social Security COLA as we get into the later parts of this year. Now, this is Michael's Matters, and before we get to it, if you like these videos, if you find them interesting, find them helpful, or hey, you know what, you find them useful, please don't forget to like and subscribe. That way, you can get updates when our newest and most informative videos become available. All right, now, let's get down to the video. So let's start off with the newest inflation numbers out of the BLS, which is the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and that is the government organization that tracks these kinds of things. And according to them, for the month of February 2023, overall inflation had increased by 6%, which was down by about 0.4% from the previous month of January. These inflation numbers are measured by looking at a basket of goods that Americans spend money on every month, and then compare those prices to those same goods from 12 months ago. The difference in those prices represent the percentage of inflation we are currently experiencing. This specific index is referred to as the CPI-U, or the Consumer Price Index for all urban consumers. This new lower CPI-U number follows along the trend that started basically last June in 2022, when it appears that inflation hit its peak at 9.1% inflation. Also, that is a big part of why the cost of living adjustment, or the COLA, for this year was so high at 8.7%. But these numbers really only tangentially reflect the most important numbers for folks concerned about their Social Security COLA increase, because Social Security beneficiaries' COLA's increase are actually based off a different version of the CPI called the CPI-W, which is the Consumer Price Index for urban wage earners and clerical workers. This CPI looks at the cost that the average clerical urban worker has, which I think is fair to say is probably pretty different from the average cost that the older American has. But this number is the number that Social Security yearly COLA is pegged to, and it uses this basket of goods to measure inflation overall for the COLA, which often, unfortunately, really is not representative of the cost that older Americans have. For example, it doesn't give adequate weight to things like Medicare or medical expenses, transportations, or prescriptions that really do take up a bigger portion of a senior's budget than it does for the average urban clerical worker's budget. This to me is kind of sort of suspicious, and I wonder if that's why the lower CPI-W number is used instead of perhaps a better CPI number. Now, this may be a bit of a tinfoil hat, but if we look at an alternative, an arguably better CPI measurement that measures the cost that seniors actually have, then the numbers for inflation actually look way different. That's because there is a CPI number that does actually look specifically at the cost that older Americans have, in fact, anybody who's over the age of 62, and it compares those ones year over year to see what that inflation would be. This CPI is called the CPI-E, or the Consumer Price Index for the elderly. This CPI number is seen as a better metric for inflation that older Americans experience because of the fact that it does weight those costs that older Americans have differently than in comparison to the general cost that the average urban clerical wage worker has. When this is taken into account, it shows that the inflation for February 2023 for seniors, that is again anyone over 62, they actually experienced an inflation rate of 6.53%, which is down by 0.23% from 6.76% that it was in January. This ultimately means that because Social Security COLA is calculated off of the lower CPI-W number, which remember was only showing 5.8% inflation rather than the higher CPI-E number, it means that any potential COLA at this point in time would be essentially 0.73% lower than what it should be to actually keep up with seniors' real-world costs. So what that looks like in real numbers, we can take a look at that if we want to do an example here real quick. So if we took the average Social Security benefits in February of 2023, which is at $1,693.88, and apply the current percentage increase on the CPIW to it, the 5.8, it would mean that in dollars, if the COLA was adjusted to this rate right now, in 2024, they would be getting a Social Security benefit check of $1,792.13 a month. But when we compare that to the 6.53% increase in inflation that seniors are actually feeling based off the CPIE, that same check, if it was to be increased by the 6.53% for the COLA for 2024 instead, it would come out to $1,804.49 a month, which is $12.37, which is not a ton monthly. But when we look at that yearly, that comes out to $148.38, which is definitely not nothing. And that's an amount they're not getting because of that lower CPIW number. So it is hard to think about whether this is actually done on purpose or not. All right, so that aside, this month the CPIW was showing a lower growth in inflation than previous months at 5.8%, which is down by 0.5% lower than it was in January, where it was at 6.3%. Ultimately, what this means is that if the trend continues to decrease in the same direction, when the sample months are done in the fall to create the Social Security COLA increase, it could mean a much, much, much smaller increase in Social Security benefits for 2024 or none at all. Now, although it is a little early to be prognosticating exactly what the COLA increase or no increase will be for 2024, let's talk about why the lower inflation trend could end up meaning a very low or even $0 COLA in 2024, and what this would mean for Social Security beneficiaries who rely on the COLA every year to help them pay for their cost of living. As we talked about, the yearly Social Security COLA is based off the CPIW inflation index that is measured in the third quarter of every single year. Then they average that inflation rate for those months, July, August, September, and that is combined to create the COLA increase for the future year, in this case for 2024. According to the Senior Citizens League, which is a nonpartisan group that advocates for seniors in America, quote, long-term trends indicate a significant drop in the average monthly rate of inflation over the past 12 months and suggest that the next annual cost of living adjustment in 2024 could drop below 3%, end quote. Furthermore, if inflation was to drop down to the point of zero, that would mean a $0 increase in the COLA for 2024. And if we look at the COLA increase history chart, we can see that this happened pretty much only a handful of times when the U.S. economy was usually going into some sort of economic downturn or a recession. Since the inception of the COLA, it increased by $0 basically only a handful of times in 2009, 2010, and 2015. But a COLA increase of 3% or lower is actually pretty common. It, in fact, is more common than not. Now, interestingly enough, in that same release from the Senior Citizens League, they discuss a more concerning issue that is facing many seniors in America, especially looming for tax seasons that have yet to come, and this one as well. That is the fact that around half of Social Security beneficiaries, if not higher, are subject to paying federal income tax on up to 85% of their Social Security benefits. Now, that number was taken back in 2020, but given the pretty rapid increase in Social Security COLA lately over these last couple of years, and the hesitancy by the government to increase the limits for how much someone can make before they have to pay taxes on their Social Security benefits, it could mean many, many, many more seniors, retirees, and older Americans who are going to find out that they're going to end up having to pay taxes on some of their Social Security benefits, especially after that 8.7% COLA for this year. Now, there's a lot more on this topic, and I think we're probably going to save this one for another full video here in the near future. But again, if you are curious about how Social Security benefits are taxed and whether or not you could potentially pay that 85% if you're one of those folks who could on their Social Security benefits, I'll put a link up here for that video as well, and we'll pick that one up in another future video. All right, so overall, I kind of really have mixed feelings about this most recent inflation and CPI report because, yes, for the general population and the economy, it is good that inflation is going down if it is indeed going down, especially after, they fiddled with the numbers and how the way they calculated inflation starting in January, which does kind of still leave me sort of dubious as I reflect on those numbers. Again, another issue for another video. But the real disappointment is the continual usage of the CPIW to set benefits for Social Security beneficiaries when there's an obvious better metric, the CPIE. Now, I'm sure it all eventually comes down to money and the fact that it would take a literal act of Congress to change it, But, it still doesn't seem fair. And it does really end up making all the sense in the world why, over the last progressive years, the COLA just never seems to keep up with the cost of inflation that seniors have. All right, so that's it for today's Michael's Matters, talking about inflation and how the 2024 COLA could be affected by it. And I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you did, if you found it interesting, if you found it helpful, or hey, if you found it useful, please don't forget to like and subscribe. That way you can get updates when our newest and most informative videos become available. So for Michael's Matters, I hope you take care of yourself. I hope you take care of others. And I hope that you have a happy, healthy day.